Hello, everybody. This is the first. We're reading today together a book named A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. And this is a book by George Saunders. And I've just started it. This is the very first chapter, but some things really stood out to me. So I've got a ton of highlights on the book. But here is the beginning of the book. It's titled We Begin. For the last 20 years at Syracuse University, I've been teaching a class in the 19th century Russian short story in translation. My students are some of the best young writers in America. They arrive already wonderful. What we try to do over the next 3 years is help them achieve what I call their iconic space. What I love about George, and this is me talking, is that some of the questions he's writing, the way he's phrasing creativity, and the way that he's describing writing, structure, just has been really thoughtful to me. And so as I keep reading, the place from which they will write the stories, only they could write, using what makes them uniquely themselves. Their strengths, weaknesses, obsessions, peculiarities, the whole deal. At this level, good writing is assumed. The goal is to help them acquire the technical means to become defiantly and joyfully themselves. So on a separate note, really, that's, to me, what it means to be a healer and to heal. When we come to this earth, and when we're able to become defiantly and joyfully ourselves, we find that's where the discovery and being the brightest versions of ourselves begins. And so this is George speaking again. After a few years back, after class, chalk dust hovering in the autumnal air, old-fashioned radiator clanking in the corner, marching band practicing somewhere in the distance, let's say, I had the realization that some of the best moments of my life, the moments during which I've really felt myself offering something of value to the world, have been spent teaching that Russian class. The stories I teach in it are constantly with me as I work, the high bar against which I measure my own. I want my stories to move and change someone as much as these Russian stories have moved and changed me. After all these years, the texts feel like old friends I get to introduce to a new group of brilliant young writers every time I teach the class. So I decided to write this book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, to put some of what my students and I have discovered together over the years down on paper and, in that way, offer a modest version of that class to you. Over an actual semester, we might read 30 stories, 2 or 3 per class, but for the purpose of this book, we'll limit ourselves to 7. And so this is George talking a little bit more about these stories, and some of the lines I've highlighted stood out to me, which are, they're great stories, in my opinion, written during a high water period for the form, Russian literature. But they're not all equally great. Some are great in spite of certain flaws, but some are great because of their flaws. What I really want to talk about is the short story form itself. And these are good stories, these 7, for that purpose. Simple, clear, elemental. For a young writer, reading the Russian stories of this period is akin to a young composer studying Bach. All of the bedrock principles of the form, short stories, are on display. The stories are simple, but moving. We care about what happens in them. They were written to challenge and antagonize and outrage, and, in a complicated way, to console. I also highlighted This is resistance literature written by progressive reformers in a repressive culture under constant threat of censorship in a time when a writer's politics could lead to exile, imprisonment, and execution. The resistance in the stories is quiet, at a slant, and comes perhaps from the most radical idea of all. That every human being is worthy of attention, and that the origins of every good and evil capability of the universe may be found by observing a single, even very humble, person at the turnings of his or her mind. So, skipping ahead to some more about this introduction chapter, Howard writes, "We live, as you may have noticed, in a degraded area, bombarded by facile, shallow, agenda-laced, too rapidly disseminated information bursts. We're about to spend some time in a realm where it is assumed that, as the great 20th century Russian short story master Isaac Babel put it, no iron spike can pierce a human heart as icily as a period in the right place. We're about to enter 7 fastidiously constructed scale models of the world, made for a specific purpose that our time maybe doesn't fully endorse, but that these writers accepted implicitly as the aim of art, namely, to ask the big questions. How are we supposed to be living down here? What were we put here to accomplish? What should we value? What is truth, anyway? And how might we recognize it? How can we feel any peace when some people have everything and others have nothing? How are we supposed to live with joy in a world that seems to want us to love other people, but then roughly separates us from them in the end, no matter what? You know, those cheerful Russian kinds of big questions. For a story to ask those or these sorts of questions, we first have to finish it. It has to draw us in, compel us to keep going. So the aim of this book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, is mainly diagnostic. If a story drew us in, kept us reading, made us feel respected, how did it do that? I'm not a critic or a literary historian or an expert on Russian literature or any of that. The focus of my artistic life has been trying to learn to write emotionally moving stories that a reader feels compelled to finish. I consider myself more vaudevillian than scholar. Vaudevillian than scholar. My approach to teaching is less academic and more strategic. The basic drill I'm proposing here is read the story, then turn your mind to the experience you've just had. Was there a place you found particularly moving? Something you resisted or that confused you? A moment when you found yourself tearing up, getting annoyed, thinking anew? Any lingering questions about the story? Any answer is acceptable. If you, my good-hearted trooper of a reader, felt it, it's valid. If it confounded you, that's worth mentioning. If you were bored or pissed off, valuable information. No need to dress up your response in literary language or express it in terms of theme or plot or character development or any of that. The stories were, of course, written in Russian. I offer the English translations that I've responded to most strongly, or in some cases, the versions I first found years ago and have been teaching from ever since. The main thing I want us to be asking together is, what did we feel and where did we feel it? All coherent intellectual work begins with a genuine reaction. So this is a book for writers, but also, I hope, for readers. And this is to close this first chapter, and we'll pause the video after this here to continue reading A Swim in a Pond in a Rain by George, not Howard, George Saunders, is throughout this book, I'll be offering some models for thinking about stories. No one of these is correct or sufficient. Think of them as rhetorical trial balloons. What if we think about a story this way? Is that useful? If a model appeals to you, use it. If not, discard it. In Buddhism, it's said that a teaching is like a finger pointing at the moon. The moon, enlightenment, is the essential thing, and the finger pointing is trying to direct us to it. But it's important not to confuse finger with moon. For those of us who are writers, who dream of someday writing a story like the ones we've loved, into which we've disappeared pleasurably, and that briefly seemed more real to us than so-called reality, the goal, or the moon, is to attain the state of mind from which we might write such a story. That sounds powerful. I'm going to read it again. The goal, the moon, the goal is to attain the state of mind from which we might write such a story. The goal is to heal and to attain a state of connection with spirit from which we might become healers. All of the workshop talk and story theory and aphoristic, clever, craft-encouraging slogans are just fingers pointing at the moon, trying to lead us to that state of mind. The criterion by which we accept or reject any given finger, is it helping? And as George says, I offer what follows in that spirit. So there you have it. This is our first pass today at this reading of this wonderful book so far about storytelling, and I'm excited to get through it with y'all. This is Philip Chen, and we are magical.